Now more than ever, it's easy to find kindred spirits who you can geek out with, but it wasn't always that way. On this episode of the Infusion Breakdown Show, the Breakdown crew sat down with two very special guests, brand new guest, my homeboy Austin Tillery, and returning guest, KJ, to discuss this shift in culture and what made it so acceptable to be a geek. Let's see what we came up with.
Before we get started on today's episode, I'd like to introduce to you our Black-owned Business of the Week, where we showcase quality Black-owned businesses for you to support every week. This week's business is ILLESTHETIC magazine by curator/artist Kayla Jones, where their mission is to find entrepreneurs and creatives alike from the DMV who are making a difference in their communities. If you're interested in discovering local talent, or if you're interested in having your work featured, all that can be done from the convenience of their website. Check it out.
So the question we're going to have for today, why did it take so long for Geekdom to become acceptable? Comment below, let us know. Today's guests include Austin and return guest KJ.
All right, so what exactly is geekdom? Geekdom is the state of being a geek, or I want to say it's rooted with the geek culture as a whole. Now, back in the day, let's take it back to, I want to say 1980, when it's like Star Wars Empire Strikes Back, where the term geek was used kind of as a derogatory term, basically saying that you have a person that knows a random amount of information about an obscure topic or subject. Now, one of the things about Star Wars that really brung geekdom on into popular culture is the fact that it has all the elements of what really entices people to become geeks. It has sci-fi elements with the futuristic tech, has expansive lore, and which allows people to talk about it, and it brings people together. And it brings interesting story. It has an interesting story and characters, allows people to relate to them in their own way. Another thing is it also allows further iterations of it, which creates more people to come in as the franchise keeps going. Now, I would say that's one of the examples that really brought people to know what a geek really is, but I wouldn't say that's the movie that allows people to really say geeks are cool. So
what was that movie?
We're gonna fast forward to 1999 with the advent of the .NET boom. So with the .NET boom, we saw the innovation of technology, where people were able to actually look at how technology can go further, and you could actually see it changing. Like you can actually see it from a ground level. Like an everyday person can actually get can actually look at the technology and say, like they're actually like this could be a revolutionary thing. Now, one of the movies that I would say that made geeks cool in a way is The Matrix, where you have a character that basically makes it so that he goes into a virtual world, which people can relate to because of the internet. And people can say, while we're looking at this while the Matrix kind of exaggerates how virtual reality works, people can relate to it, actually say that, like, hey, this is something that could be, like, this is the possibility of what could happen in the future. And I'm guessing that after people left the movie, they started to become hooked on it, like hooked on the thought of maybe this is where like we could lead to this. And I think that's what really gave the idea that maybe geeks could be considered cool, because now fast forwarding to today, we see virtual reality becoming rampant, and also the superhero boom is also a big thing in popular culture, and everybody seems to love that. So I think that now that people can actually see geekdom as a whole, like they actually have their own experience because it became more mainstream, we're having a more positive connotation towards it. Basically saying that now we can see it as not just a person that knows about an obscure topic, but now it can be a topic such as maybe a music geek, or maybe a horror movie geek. We're now thinking maybe it could be, we could use it for other terms aside from just sci-fi and just something that would be that you could be ashamed of.
I understand the question, but what makes you? Are you saying just because it's not cool, it's not acceptable? Is that generally what you say, as far as it's not acceptable? Because what makes you say it's not acceptable? What is? Because I understand what you mean as far as everybody geekdom, as far as people dressing up and everything, but how do you know that's just people not appealing to that type of culture or that type of customs? You know, like what? How do you know it wasn't really acceptable? How do you know it's just people have difference in opinions?
So I'm assuming that question is targeted towards me.
Anybody.
Okay. So with geekdom being acceptable, it all started to, I remember I was kind of on the fringes of my interest when I was growing up. So the other kids were in my school, and particularly us being people of color, black kids. Like a lot of the black kids, they thought, or they gave it the perception of they were too cool for Dragon Ball Z and all those shows like that. It's like KJ can perfectly relate to. It's like they weren't really interested. They were more interested in the sports athletes, the music videos and stuff like that. They were watching 106 & Park. I didn't give a damn about 106 & Park. I was trying to watch Toonami when I got home. And so for a large portion of time, it was that kind of disparity. But then over time, I started to see more and more people that look like us being interested in these particular topics. So I'm not just saying as it relates to people of color or black people, but on a wider scale, I feel like there weren't always these larger conventions where people would go together. There was more so like people on the fringes of society, and they had like a certain negative perception of them. So you would think that, oh, people in a comic book shop is like some fat sloppy guy with a bald spot and a ponytail and sandals or something like that. And it's just like those are the people who that draws. But over time, it started to become more inclusive, and people more comfortable about sharing these ideas and exchanging in dialogues about different fandoms that they were part of. Like, oh, like you could be on the subway in New York or something like that and start talking to somebody about Star Wars, for example, like Austin was just talking about. Or you could just be like at work, and there's an entire group of people at my job, and we have a Slack channel, and they talk about like video games and like when Animal Crossing comes out and stuff like that, or Marvel superhero movies. Like we have groups of people, and it's so far expansive and diverse that it's people you would never guess because they don't fit the quote unquote what it looks like to be a geek that are parts of those groups. That's what I meant by being acceptable.
Okay.
KJ, I feel like I mean you definitely felt that when I said that it wasn't always acceptable. So I was hoping that you would shine some more light with your personal experience with that, and then kind of give us your answer to why it took so long for it to become acceptable.
So I was definitely have to agree with you that it was for me at least, it was more of like within the black community, where it was like geeky stuff was like, oh, well, why are you doing that? You're weird, blah blah blah. Part of that is I feel partially like coming from. Okay, so I'm just gonna take a step back and say I really like BET. I feel like BET pushes like a false image of what a black person is supposed to be like and what black culture is supposed to represent. And a lot of BET movies, like a lot of black people watch BET. And so from a young age, you know, they're seeing like, oh, this is what black people do. This is how black people behave. This is stuff that black people think are cool. So you go enter me, and I'm looking at Toonami every day after school, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Goku's about to go Super Saiyan 3. Well, he just went Super Saiyan 3, and he like almost tore the universe apart. And everyone's like, what are you talking about? You ain't watched Baby Boy last night? And it's like, like 10 years ago.
for the 10,000th time.
So it's like, I feel like that was like a big part of it, like not being accepted, because it wasn't like something that you would see within like your projected demographic. And I feel like something that really brought at least anime culture into like mainstream was Toonami. I feel like being able to have a place on mainstream television where anime got like a normal airtime at one point, because they did end up putting it on Saturdays at like 1 o'clock in the morning. But at one point they used to come on at like 5 o'clock in the evening. And I feel like that was a really big part in introducing a lot of kids to anime. And by doing so, it opened the door for other animes to reach people in our position. And then that led for it to become more accepted into pop media culture.
But I'm sorry, how do you know you guys just didn't grow up though? How do you know that's still not happening in those schools now? Like people are still joking on those kids that are in those anime circles. Like how do you know you guys just didn't grow up and just seen other people that's just like you and have more adapted to that culture? How do you know that?
So I don't know, and that's a really big point you make. It's my perspective. I'm not in school anymore, so I don't see how people get teased or anything anymore. And I do realize that school in general was just like a bad place to stand out in general, because you stand out in school, everyone's gonna like nail down or hammer down on you or whatnot. Another big portion of why I can't really speak on that is because I've surrounded myself with a lot more people who enjoy anime culture or geek culture. So of course, if I talk about it, I'm around people who enjoy it, they're not going to say anything. But I do feel like even around people who don't particularly enjoy that, like I have a certain group of friends at ODU who don't necessarily watch anime. They recently started watching it because I always talk about it. But when I first met them, they weren't really into it. And they would be like, well, I'm not really into it, but I mean, you like it, so that's pretty cool. And that just might be a maturity thing. So I can't really differentiate if that's like it becoming more popular all around the board.
KJ, I can defend the opposite stance, because so this kind of segues into the answer of why I think that it took so long to become acceptable. Is that, I mean, you could just look inside of a movie theater when you go there and see, like Josh went to go see Captain Marvel or any of the other DC movies. I mean, excuse me, Marvel movies. Shouldn't have made that mistake. Unacceptable. But if you go to see any of those movies in the movie theaters, you see like there's such a variety of people. Like I see people of all ages in groups and colors. So over time, I've seen a more gradual shift. So I could say, of course, I could just be seeing a very small sample size of people, and that could just be my experience. But that's just an observation that I have. That's kind of gave me that impression that it was becoming more acceptable. But so I think the reason that it took so long for geekdom to become acceptable itself is film. So film drives culture. And if you think about that, so I looked up some numbers just about the film industry in comparison to the music industry. And the film industry last year grossed $42.5 billion, whereas the music industry grossed $11.1 billion last year. And so that just shows you how much more revenue that particular industry brought in. And so with the introduction, I'll go back to 1977. So Austin, you were a little bit off with your Star Wars movies. You said The Empire Strikes Back. I'm gonna go back to the very first one, A New Hope. And so you just look at how groundbreaking the first Star Wars movie was. Like it was really ahead of its time in terms of like the content that it put out. And then I was looking at it earlier today, just some snippets of it, and it aged extremely well. Like you can put it next to any movie up until the CGI era, and even some afterwards, and it's far better. And I feel like that's something that they were really innovative on. So you could break it down into the fact of like the opening scene was a classic visual. Everybody knows the opening score from Star Wars, and I mean down to the part where the Imperial Star Destroyer was pursuing the other ship. Like it was just so iconic, and it aged extremely well. It looks like something that was produced pretty recently. Like you wouldn't think that it was damn near 50 years ago. And then also a few other things that George Lucas did when that movie was created. It was the speed, because prior to then, you look at Star Trek, they had a different perception of spaceships. So the spaceships were really large, sluggish. But if you look at Star Wars, how they portrayed them, they were much more up to speed. It looked like they were actually racing. At some points, they were in some of the latter movies. But like the opening scene where they were doing the pursuit, it was much more different portrayal of the technology, and that was allowed due to the camera technology. So there was a camera called the Dystraflex, which is actually a motion camera that was produced specifically to create that movie. And so that also allowed them to have a large technological leap above the other movies around that point in time. And then, like I alluded to in the beginning, the epic score, the opening song music, and then the iconic soundboard. So they did a lot of work when it came to finding sounds to fit the specific actions, like the laser. I can just say Star Wars laser, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. You hear it in your head, like it's that iconic. And then like Chewbacca, his the noises he makes, they use a variety of animal noises. It was a bear, walrus, some other crazy ones too. And it was just so much thought, and uh, the production was so well thought out into every detail, everything that went into it. And I guess the biggest one, Austin, you kind of touched on this a little bit too, was the world building aspect of it. And I was talking to my father earlier because my dad, he was born in 1971. So he went to go see this as a child in the theaters, and he was saying how it impacted everyone and what his immediate thoughts of it were. And for the first time, they were portraying aliens as these multi-dimensional characters. They weren't just simply these grays with these big eyes abducting cows out of cornfields and crazy stuff like that. These are actual characters that had dimensions to them. And I think that went a large way into where we're currently at in the film industry. And so if you were to look, for example, at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, these superheroes, they're very layered, they're very complex, they're flawed characters, which allows you more intricacy and allows you to tell a more compelling story, as opposed to somebody who's very who has everything together. A long time ago, the cartoons, they were more along the lines of, I'm a good guy, you're a bad guy. I'm gonna beat you because you're bad, and that was it. So why are you bad? You want to take over the world? Okay, so what are you gonna do when you take over the world? I'm gonna make everyone evil. Why do you want to do that? I don't know. It was very simple. The plot was like one dimensional, very one dimensional. And along with the rise of Star Wars and other media during that time, like I really do think Austin was onto something with the 1970 late 70s, early 80s. Because if you look at the original Transformers movie in 1986, so it's a great movie. It aged extremely well, not from a visual standpoint or animated standpoint, but just for how ahead of its time it was. Like the subject matter, within the first few minutes, I think 4 Autobots had already gotten smoked by the Decepticons on their spaceship. Like they busted up in there and they killed Wheeljack, Ratchet, and like 2 other Transformers. Just shot, put holes in their chest, and then melted from the inside out. It was really cool. But it was a very stylistic change, and it was more adult subject matter being discussed. And you would see like these deaths, and then there was also like more meaning behind the storytelling that was going along. And so anyone who knows about cartoons or anything like that, or any of these fandoms, toy sales drive the money. They drive the show. That's why shows get canceled, because they're not selling toys. And so how do you find a way to captivate people as they mature? Because you think adults don't really buy toys like that. So what filmmakers have been able to do throughout the expansion of science fiction and the Marvel Cinematic Universe into modern day, and then other film companies, they were able to captivate adults as well. And so what that did is, by them making more compelling stories with dimensional characters, the characters grew alongside the adults, and in turn, the adults were able to share their passion for these old series, such as Star Wars, Transformers, even like to a lesser degree Power Rangers. The movie was terrible, but they were able to share that with their kids. KJ, you didn't agree?
I don't think I would go as far to call it terrible, but
The Megazord, come on, man. But they're they're able to share that with their kids, and so I feel like that went a long way into preserving that and showing interest. And so now it's something that spans among generations and is more acceptable. So it's a more communal thing, and I feel like that's why it became more acceptable, because it bridged the gap between generations and it applies to everyone. It's kind of very similar to Adventure Time as a show, because everyone likes it because it's like the kids watch the little dumbass characters. They look really cute, but the adults like it because the jokes and the humor, and we get it. So it appeals to both audiences. and that's why it's so successful. And I feel like that's why it's more acceptable for geekdom. I feel like that contributed to that by a large part.
Hmm.
Is the stylistic shift.
If I could branch off what KJ said, one of the things that really stuck with me is the fact that BET paints this image of African Americans to act this certain way. And I think one of the things that made it so hard for geekdom to become acceptable in a society is society itself. Like how people interpret themselves in media as what you would consider cool can really shape a person's mind. Like when you look at a character in Star Wars, you want to look at it in your own perspective, saying, how does this relate to me? And if you're busy looking at like BET movies or shows, and they're vastly different from what you're accustomed to, then you're not going to give it a chance. And then you'll shame the people that don't know, that don't have your same ideas. And I think one of the things that made it so hard for geeking to become acceptable is the fact that it's hard to get people into something that it's hard to change people. That's what I'm saying as a whole.
I mean, it's a pretty big task because you think about. I mean, there are some people that do fit the stigma of geeks, and or people see like one bad example, and then they'll kind of like lump everyone into that group. But
They'll
I
have
can,
their head like a stigma.
yeah, exactly. And so what KJ was saying, and what I was saying also about our experience growing up and it not being as cool, is when people did that, they kind of like boxed themselves off mentally, and it's just like they we're gonna deal with that whatsoever. We kind of talked about this on another episode about just exploring what you thought was cool, and these a lot of people who are still finding enjoying these things are people who have fell in love with their inner child again. Josh, what's your take?
I don't know, man. I hear what you guys are saying, and everything like that, but I really just feel it's really just a difference of lifestyle, to be honest with you. Like you mentioned the first Star Wars movie that made over $700 million, like at the box office. So as far as acceptable in what other people feel, I feel like I feel this question really doesn't matter, because as far as if you're a geek, like you shouldn't care what society feels about you or how you feel. Like you're doing the right thing anyway. Like the the Asian kids that are in the library 12 hours a day just studying, you should be like them. They're the ones that don't care about anybody. Like, so I really feel like the question is kind of weird, because like, who cares? Like, if it's not acceptable, it's what you like. It's what makes you happy. So if
I agree. Ideally.
yeah, but if you're talking about why it's not acceptable in the Black community, that's a whole different thing. And I understand what you guys are talking about, but just in general, I feel the question is just, it's weird. Like people, I heard stories of like women that would have that type of lifestyle and they would come across a guy and that guy would be like confused and everything like that. But I just feel people fear what, like Tanaz said, people fear what they don't understand, hate what they can't conquer. So
Correct.
Yeah.
What you were saying about people in the broader space of it not being acceptable. So another thing that I used to base this off of was the fact of how open people were to talking about these things and how often these came up in conversation. And as I've gotten older, I've seen more and more people just in passing talking about these different.
but in that situation though, oh, you can see more people, but okay. I'm guessing you're taking in a situation where somebody would hide that they're actually into that thing.
Yeah, people do that.
Yeah.
I guess, but if you see somebody else that is into that type of thing, you're going to approach them and talk about it, right? So, and if you see somebody else that's not into that type of thing, you just won't say anything about it. So are you really hiding it, or are you just not divulging that type of lifestyle
Okay.
that you live?
Perfect example. All right, so at my job, we have a group of people who like playing Dance Revolution. Like the people who go to the arcades and they tap their feet off like they're killing roaches at somebody's trap house. Like it's those people who will spend hours there, and they'll have towels and stuff like that to wipe the sweat off. Like they'll do that, and so it's a group that's like a private channel, and they're secretive about it. They don't want other people to know that that's what they do. They enjoy that. They're immersed in that culture, but it's not mainstream or acceptable enough because it's weird for them to do that. So therefore, they're not open with it. And then so like our CTO, he had asked about it, and then like everybody that's part of that group, they were just silent. They didn't want to tell. They didn't want to say who was in it. And he was just asking out of curiosity. He's gonna maybe like poke a joke at him or something like that. But they legitimately would not own up to being a part of the group. Like they're interested in it. And so that's what I was saying about it not being acceptable. If you're not willing to express yourself or stand up for something that you're interested in, and you have to put on a facade that you're somebody that you're not, or that you're not interested in something, that's part of not being acceptable.
Well, it's not really acceptable to you, not really to them, because if you like it, it still shouldn't matter. Maybe it is speaking from my point of view.
It should not
but
matter.
Yeah, it shouldn't matter. Like, of course, I can't say that I wouldn't say anything about those guys doing that. But even if you do that, like, shit, you know how much we know the the pros of doing that. Like for how long they're doing it, you know how much exercise they're getting off of that. Like, so if you like it, so I mean, but I understand what you're saying. People hiding it, but I feel that's really just a reflection of them. Like if you like it, say it. And if it's somebody you feel that is into the same thing, say it. If it's somebody you don't feel the same thing, like, okay, I'm just leave it alone. Like I have certain things like I haven't divulged with you guys, like because I know you guys aren't into that same thing. So,
But at the same time, you're not ashamed of it though. Like if I was to ask you, like, "Oh, Josh, you like My Little Pony?" and you actually liked it, what would you say? Would you say no, or would you actually just say, "You know what? Yeah, it's pretty cool. I like
would
Rainbow
say,
Corn."
well, I'll be different, but I understand what you're saying. Where people be like, "Oh no, I'm not into that." I understand what you mean, but I would, yeah, fuck yeah, My Little Pony, that's my shit. What you talking about? But I understand what you mean when people want to hide it because of that bigger thing. But I feel that's on them. You know
It is.
Des, you got something to say?
Yeah, Des, I know you don't really partake in this, so I'm curious as to why you don't, or what was your experience with it? You found that you didn't have an interest in geekdom itself or any of the various branches.
I wouldn't necessarily say like I didn't have any interest into any of the variables that fall within geekdom. I think for me, like I was just, I've always been like unapologetically me when it comes to what I like. And I've always been an introvert. So I never really needed to talk to other people about things that I watched or things that I love because I love doing them in isolation. So I think really what could have potentially sparked the the rise in mainstream media and whatever accepting anime in itself or things that fall within that category is just the bridging of the gaps. I mean, essentially you have people who are an influence on pop culture today that have interest in those things that didn't have those interests. Like when you think about to the early 2000s and the 90s, you found out Tupac liked anime, he'd lose the thug life appeal. If you found out 50 Cent liked anime, he would lose the thug appeal. If you found out, any of your favorite rappers or any of your favorite, pop icons like anime, it would lose the appeal. Or not necessarily gonna say lose the appeal, but it would be like a one-off, like, really? Like
You'll
people
see
would
them
be
differently.
shocked or surprised. So I think just kind of as like Austin said with the .com boom, as we see today, like, I mean, social media, you have access to, more data than you can imagine. Like Wikipedia is superfluous now because you can find anything you want on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or whatever. Like everything is literally just at your fingertips without research. So you're more likely to come across anime scenes. You're more likely to come across, any cut scene for, what you would consider a geek film or whatever, and you get some exposure to it. I mean, for me, for example, like I love Star Wars. I've seen every Star Wars movie numerous times, but I've always been able to read the room, so I know who I can have those conversations with and who I can't have those conversations with. So easy to say, code switching for me was never really a big deal. Like I can talk to my manager at work now about Star Wars till I'm blue in the face, but then 5 minutes later I can talk to my coworker that sits behind me about anything like new shoes that are coming out, new rap songs, albums, anything like I can code switch without an issue. So I never really ran into the issue as far as like not fitting in because of my own personal views. What I will say though is one thing that I have realized based off of anime itself is it's not for the dense. Like it's literally a chapter book that plays out over episodes. And you think about the amount of people that don't read to hold somebody's attention for that amount of time and to have to piece everything together. Because anime, it's not your reality TV series that lasts like 4 or 5 years. Like animes can last like 10 plus seasons and you can never get tired of it. Like there are some, of course, short-lived anime series, but if you think about how deep anime can get, I mean, it's a lot to keep up with. And I think when you have a portion of the society that's very dense and they don't retain the information itself, it's easy to lose interest and stuff like that. Because anime, like we all know, even with your reality TV and your 5 o'clock sitcoms, like there's filler episodes, and sometimes the filler episodes of anime are a lot more boring than your filler episodes of like House of Cards or Scandal or any of the other stuff. So it's not for the dense. I mean, there's a reason why ABC has Scandal playing versus Dragon Ball Super or Attack on Titan. Like there's reasons for it, and I think you kind of have to know what your base is and play towards it. I mean, the benefit now, and I think another reason why we see a lot more of it is because streaming services. You have more access to anime, whereas before, like you have to find websites to watch all that, and sometimes the websites would only have the sub version versus the dub. So I mean, really, anime isn't something that originated from American culture. It's Japanese culture that has been glorified. So that's another reason as well to where like we don't have firsthand experience. Like our people aren't creating these. I mean, the closest thing we got to was the Boondocks and Samurai Jack as well. Well, I wouldn't even say that, but you could Samurai Jack for me is an honorable mention because of was it Samuel L. Jackson, but like I think everything boils down to exposure. I kind of was, as I was hearing you guys talk, I kind of thought about how, people or society as a whole has become, more accepting to like the equal
LGBTQ.
rights per se. Yeah, LGBTQ community, just because of exposure with time. Like when you get more exposure to something, you want to learn more from it. You want to gain more information from it. And that's not a surprise as well, because I mean, think about our generation. Like we've seen it on TV, and for some of us have seen it on TV, but may not have ever got interested in it. And now that we have the means of more information in regards to it, like some of us go back and watch those animes that we might not have watched when we were kids. Like I know for me, I went back and I rewatched Dragon Ball Z at like 19. Like watching as a kid, I didn't really care for the storyline, but like as I got older, like I went back and I rewatched a lot of the animes that I passed up on.
KJ, a lot of people, prior to the streaming service like Desmond was just mentioning, we had, I guess our first introduction to anime was Toonami. So I would watch it with my dad. And so Toonami was really groundbreaking in the fact that the amount of shows that it introduced to I guess our Western society. We had like Zoids, Gundam, Dragon Ball Z. There were quite a few. And then even like the later at night time slots, they had this one that I was really a huge fan of. But I actually introduced Austin to. Austin's also a pretty big anime buff, called Case Closed, Detective Conan. You ever seen that?
Yeah, I see.
And yeah, that was my first introduction. So Toonami, I feel like that was the real gateway into anime for most people. And then most people got most familiar with like the Dragon Ball Z, which I guess was like soft anime, because that's what they associated all anime was like of that category. They kind of typecast it. But then as they began to explore it more often, they found out that there's different kinds of anime. Like Austin, what's the one that you showed me? So for those of you who don't know, Austin is we used to be roommates. We were friends from college. I was my homeboy, and we were roommates for 2 years. And so one time we were watching this. He introduced me to this anime to where there were demons farming people as a food source, and it was just so.
Oh.
You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
It's so strange and obscure, but the plot is captivating because the kids in the orphanage are trying to escape the farm, and it's under the guise that it's like a orphanage where they're being taken care of, and the kids
Neverland.
go home. What is it called?
The Promised Neverland, I think.
Yeah, and it's just like you can't really typecast anime because there's ones about everything. Like there's a boxing anime, there's one about firefighting, then you have ones about superheroes like My Hero Academia, which is super popular now. Like you see a lot of girls are even fans of that, and they'll dress up as a different characters for Halloween and do like the cosplay makeups and stuff like that. Like it's I guess Toonami was a gateway drug of sorts to introduce people to the concept of anime and getting them familiar with it.
I think if I could branch off of Desmond, I think he really made a really good point about the fact that one of the things that really held Geekdom back is the fact of accessibility. Like when I said being a geek is knowing random information about obscure knowledge, looking back at now that I'm listening to you guys, this obscure knowledge that I'm referring to is probably the fact that nobody knew about it. Like for instance, you have animes from before it was actually accessible in America, and it was in Japan, and nobody knew about it, and they were learning about other things instead. So when you come up and talk about that stuff, nobody actually knows what you're talking about. So you hide that, or you're just ashamed of it because you can't really relate it to somebody because they won't give it a chance. But now that you have the internet, social media, people will have the chance of actually looking at it themselves instead of having to go to a box or an event where like-minded people come together and they talk about stuff. Now you have people from outside of the box that can look at it for themselves.
Now, Austin, before I forget, before we were recording, you had started on a tangent about differentiating geeks and nerds. So now I'm going to allow you the floor to explain that to everyone.
Okay, so a geek, by a standard definition of a geek, is basically an enthusiast who likes a certain topic or field. Like you could like music and be considered a music geek, but a nerd, how it contrasts the fact that a nerd will know about the subject and doesn't have to necessarily like it, but they know they can intellectually talk about it. Like, for instance, you could not like math, but you could be a math nerd because you know about, for instance, the quadratic formula. Or you could actually be a nerd and a geek at the same time by liking the stuff that you know. But a lot of the times people put geek and nerd in the same box, but in reality, look at it as a Venn diagram where they have contrasting comparing qualities to themselves. But yeah, they're not, I wouldn't say that they're interchangeable.
No, Josh, I have a question for you as well. So as someone who has their own series to where you do movie reviews, and they're wonderful, by the way, check them out if you already haven't. But so as someone who does movie reviews, what are your thoughts on animated films or animated series being converted into live action films, the ones you've grown up in particular?
You said animated movies?
Yeah, animated movies being converted into live action films, like the ones that we grew up on.
Like Disney movies and stuff.
Yeah, I guess more so oriented towards like within the geek community. I wouldn't say that a lot of Disney ones were, some now actually, but I guess what brought this question to mind was the incident that happened with Sonic. Are you familiar with that?
The new movie?
Yeah. So yeah.
What incident are you referring to exactly?
Oh, you don't know about that?
Did
KJ,
you
come on,
see
man.
the first design?
Oh,
Yeah.
you talking about the designs? Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So Sonic never looked like that. I played the video games and would go run around collecting rings and stuff like that. And Sonic never looked like that. And so I saw the abomination that they put up there on the screen and tried to say that, oh, this is Sonic that the hedgehog that we've been playing with. And it's just like, no, that's not it. And so how do you feel about movies being transitioned from animated to live action? Does it need to be done for every movie? Because it seems like a trend. And even what you said with Disney.
Well, it's done mainly because of the money. They feel they're gonna make money off of the same product. It's kind of based off the lack of creativity. They're not creating any original films, so they're kind of just breaking off the old ones and just making them to remastered or making them live action or whatever. But I feel that's mainly just money. But of course, not every film needs to be remade and everything like that. But I haven't seen a new Sonic film, at least not yet. Jim Carrey's in it, so why not? But I haven't seen it, so I don't know how that exactly went. But I thought you was referring to more like the Disney movies and stuff like that. But geek movies, yeah. I think it's more. I think it's more a little bit like more of a remakes. Like, don't you like remakes too? Don't you? That's the problem too.
Yes.
Another movies that are being made as well. So
what about Dragonball Evolution?
Terrible.
I never saw that, but that was pretty bad. Listen, an anime movie, it's very hard to live action an anime movie, especially something like Dragon Ball Z. Unless you having Zack Snyder do the actual fighting, which will probably be cool, but like it's very hard, especially with the character concepts, the hair, like how you gonna do Piccolo? Are you gonna make Piccolo a black guy? Like what are you gonna do with Piccolo?
Everybody knows Piccolo's black.
So it's very hard to do that. So it really just depends on the actual anime. But Dragon Ball Z, that's kind of something like you should probably never do live action, to be honest with you. Unless
I agree.
Unless you see a kid from scratch, like, oh, he could be a Vegeta. Like he got some crazy hair and he grows up. Like, let's cast him as Vegeta, some shit. And you find other actors too. But something like Dragon Ball Z or something like that. Yeah, nah.
I think the problem with that is the fact that how animes are created, it's like water in a pot that's slowly boiling. But then when you have movies like I don't know, like for instance, a Disney movie where you could actually put everything into an hour and 30 minutes. It's like a water in a pot that's boiling quickly and falling on the floor, and you can get everything, like you can get everything out.
It's rushed.
But with Dragon Ball Z, like animes like that, there's just so much information that you would have to put it into parts. There's not enough you can condense it into a movie, and that's why I don't know. It's just a lot of work to put in for that.
That's why I feel making like a Dragon Ball Z movie is like a hard thing to do, to be honest with you, because of that reason, what Austin just said. You have to put it into parts. There's so much into it that you guys really have to put it into parts. But
really, so when I was growing up, my parents used to buy me all like the VHSs of Dragon Ball Z, like the movie with Super Android 13 and all those ones. So I mean, that can be done. There are great anime movies, a lot of them actually. Just about every fandom or every series has movies. Like Case Closed, Austin and I have watched loads of them. So ones we haven't watched. And then I think,
but if you think about they are good movies, but they're predictable as fuck. Like like I knew it was gonna happen. Like with Android 13, like the shit in the battle is when they turn Super Saiyan. Just like, why didn't you fucking do that before? Like,
they were still getting
like the fight.
I'm not trying to get into the movie, but like you it's pretty predictable what's gonna happen in the movie. It's like the whole same old conflict and then the whole resolution, but it's not really resolution, just them a power up they have to achieve or something like that. Same thing with the first Cooler movie. Like Goku waited until like 75% of the movie to turn Super Saiyan, and then that finally beat Cooler. Like what?
For sure.
So what are you doing here? Yeah. So
I definitely agree with that one. The Cooler movie was rushed.
I disagree with that. I think that's more so of Dragon Ball in general not having excellent writing. I think there are plenty of animated movies that do a very well job at capturing what's supposed to be going down, what you would expect from the show that they're trying to make.
I would just refer to Dragon Ball Z. I wasn't referring to ordinary anime. I was just referring to Dragon Ball Z.
Well,
Dragon Ball Z movies, but keep going.
Well, okay, keeping on Dragon Ball Z, as far as going to the live action movie, even though they would have to rush it to make it into like a normal length movie, I do think timing does play a role. I just don't think it plays that important of a role. I think the biggest down disadvantage that there is for live action movies is, especially for stuff like Dragon Ball Z, you can't. We don't have the technology to represent the kind of stuff that goes down in the animated films in real life. Like even
The timing I was talking about with the animated movie, the live action movie, I don't think time is problem with the live action movie as far as something like Dragon Ball Z. The problem is the concept. The problem is the characters. The problem is the characters probably looking like nothing like
The character design, yeah.
Yeah, the character design. That's really the problem. I'm not the timing is with the
Like whitewashing?
Dragon Ball Z animated movie. Said it again, Austin.
Were you talking about whitewashing? The fact that they don't look like their anime counterpart?
I wasn't
well,
technically
they just
whitewashing, but I would just like the hair. Just the first starts with the hair. Like, is the hair even like? Do you have to do CGI for this hair to make it stand up like Goku or Vegeta? Like, what do you have to do?
Oh yeah.
Like, and the character designs, yeah.
I mean, the anime movies, for example, like the last Dragon Ball Z movie that came out, or Dragon Ball Super movie with Broly, that Austin, I think
That was good. See, that was good visuals and everything. Yeah, that was
excellent. Yeah, I think we went to see it with Carter, but just even the portion where they had Gogeta when he was Super Saiyan Blue fighting against Broly in his powered up form, I think they had actually switched to CGI, and they transitioned so smoothly. You could tell there was a difference between the style of animation and the art.
It was. It was made by
different things. Yeah. What's up?
It was made by 3 teams.
Oh yeah, but it was just so smooth. So like, I do see what you're saying, Josh, about when it comes to a live action movie and being condensed within the time frame, and then I also see what we were kind of talking about with the animated movie. They suffer from the same thing. It's a different style. So if you're looking at anime for itself, it's an art form. It really is. Besides like the visual component of it, like the storytelling, it's very narrative driven for the most part. Most are episodic, and so you have to have all those working pieces, and you don't regurgitate too much information to somebody. You don't just dump stuff on them. You have to like intentionally place a bit here and there. And so when you have something packed into an hour and 30 minutes, of course there's certain constraints that come with that, but it's not saying that it can't be done because we have seen it done.
And like, have you seen the Death Note movie, the live action one?
I never watched Death Note.
Okay.
I know there's also like a series for it as well, right? Like a
Yeah, there is. Yeah. And I would recommend it. I think they're actually pretty well done. And I think that it boils down to that Death Note, the anime, was nothing really super out there. It's just a normal guy who has a notebook that can kill people. The most out there thing was that there was a pretty much guardian angel. I wouldn't.
Oh yeah, the Shinigami.
Shimigami.
Yeah, the deaf guy. That was the most out there thing, that there was a deaf guy. And then when they put him in the show, he was just invisible to everyone. So you could just cast a normal person to play him. And I think anime like that are perfectly easy to represent as live action. I think it's when you get into the more flamboyant animes where it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
Like, there's only so much that you can do. And like you said, trying to put all that into an hour and a half it's tedious.
Because a lot of like everything can't make it. Like you can try to pack all the stuff in there. Like even with me trying to edit small snippets for promotional material, if I want to get bits and snippets of everything, like very quickly, it turns from me getting 5-second snips into a video that's longer than a minute, and so stuff has to go. And so I can only imagine if you're trying to put together a hour and a half production, you have all these great ideas. Like not everything is going to make it. That's why you see like when you read a book, and there's certain elements that are missing because they need to get to the point and get the user from point A to point B within a certain span of time. Like with the Harry Potter series, for example, it was groundbreaking, like with the amount of book sales and how rich J.K. Rowling got off of that series.
Yeah.
And even with that, there's discrepancies between the books and the movies. And so with us all, just about all of us have had some kind of exposure to Star Wars, and it being a generational thing, it was around during our parents' time. Desmond, so I kind of want to ask you a little bit about what was your first exposure to Star Wars?
I think it might have been Phantom Menace.
So you actually saw the movie first?
Yeah, like my mom took me to the movie theater because like by this time we had commercials and it was, this was back then when Kellogg's was putting all the like the lightsaber spoons in the boxes and all that. So it was very well marketed. So we went and saw that, and then after that I was just hooked. I mean, I think of course by this time we had DirecTV, so whenever New Hope or Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi came out, like I was able to watch it all on through like the TV. But I mean, I had the full set for
Do you
like
pl-
my 10th birthday, like 2005. I got it for or 2004. I got it for my birthday, um, 5th grade because I had a Darth Vader cake. Still got the Return of the Jedi poster somewhere in my house, and then it's funny, my godmom, rest in peace, she got me an illegal copy of Revenge of the Sith before it came out on DVD because it was that good. So like I kept up with everything as it came out. I never was a fan of like Clone Wars and all that. Like this goes to show like I really didn't get into like the whole anime aspect. Like anything cartoon related, like if it wasn't on Cartoon Network, during your regularly scheduled programs, I really wasn't feeling it. So, I didn't get into Clone Wars. I didn't like the Clone Wars Rebels or Star Wars Rebels or any of that stuff. So, like if it was Star Wars, 1 through 6, and then of course Force Awakens and the Last Jedi, and then of course Rise of Skywalker. Like I watched all of that stuff when they first came out, except the first 3.
That's pretty interesting what I guess how you were first introduced to it, because my experience was much different. I was introduced to Star Wars later. So I was always familiar with the characters because I would see my dad's action figures when I was going to visit my grandma up the road. And I would see like the CP-30 and like the stormtroopers and stuff like stashed away. She's like, "Oh, these are your dad's old toys." So I was familiar with the characters. But my first major exposure, I watched the movies after this, was with Lego Star Wars. And so with Star Wars being so expansive that it had transitioned and crossed over to Legos. I was playing with Legos like almost instantly when I was a child. So that was my interest, and it was a nice segue to it. So once I started playing that and I started seeing like the different series and like getting more familiar with new characters, my favorite was like General Grievous because he had all the lightsabers. So I went going back and watch the movies and just enjoyed the fandom from there. So there's different points of entry, and that's why I was curious about how exactly you got introduced to it.
No, I got into it when I did. My favorite has always been like Django and Boba Fett, and I think it has a lot to do because I was introduced to Call of Duty really early.
Mm-hmm.
So like the whole militaristic aspect of both Django and Boba Fett is like why I'm attracted to them to the most. And then of course, you got to go with Mace Windu because he's only black Jedi. So
Well, the observation that I had with myself is that a lot of our interests are inherited, not necessarily directly, but indirectly, as with myself. And so, is with your interest in Star Wars, is that something you plan to share with your son?
no, I don't like I said on the previous podcast, like I don't ever intend to like pass anything down. I've always wanted to be like the parent that can teach, not influence. I mean, of course, influencing is like a form of teaching, but I don't want it to be like, okay, yeah, sit down, we're gonna watch this. Like, if he has interest in it, but oh yeah, then we can bond over it. But I don't ever intend on like forcefully passing stuff down. It'll be I'd have to see him, or I'd have to see some like form of interest with it.
Okay.
Also,
It does. I gotta. Oh wait, go ahead.
well, don't forget what you were gonna say. But so, what was your initial exposure to Star Wars as a series? Because you kind of threw me for a loop when you started mentioning like some of the older ones. Like I think you said the one from 1980.
1980, Empire
Yeah,
Strikes Back.
yeah, Empire Strikes Back,
Uh,
1980.
no, actually, my first one was actually on Toonami Clone Wars.
So you're a late bloomer.
I was. I only started looking at it because it just happened to be on, and I thought it was really interesting, and just the like the characters and the story progression, and then it made me want to actually get into the series. But then my dad actually started watching Star Wars when he was a kid as well. I think the first one that he watched was actually the third episode. But I started on Phantom Menace for the movies, and I thought it was very. Doesn't if you can agree with me if you want, but I thought it was interesting how if you didn't look at it through the order that they originally wanted you to, where it comes in you're just like in the middle of the battle, and they don't tell you what any of the characters are. Like Phantom Menace, like you already know who everybody is by the time you get to the ones earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, oh, this is Darth Vader, this is so and so, and yeah, it was very interesting. I'm happy the fact that I was able to actually look at it from 1 all the way up to 6 and further on, instead of having to look at it through the other order, because I actually get to enjoy the lore behind it.
I didn't really appreciate like 1 or 2 until I got older, because there's 2 is obviously it's a love story, but there's actually like a lot of hidden stuff in 2 that I didn't realize until like Disney Plus came out. Like on the Battle of Geonosis, like you actually see, them give Count Dooku the Death Star plans, and then he takes them to, Chancellor Palpatine. Like I didn't realize that until like I got older. Like had they have defeated Count Dooku, then there would never been a Death Star. So like it's crazy how all that stuff ties together. And the fact that they were building it on, or the fact that like the plans were started on like Geonosis was really weird to me.
That's why the Star Wars series is so great, just how intricate it was. And then so for them to create lore retroactively that fit perfectly with what already existed, it's just a testament to how brilliant George Lucas and the team of people who were building that. That's why I thought it was one of the biggest innovations when it came to making Geekdom so much more acceptable, because they just did it so damn good.
But all right, we're going to wrap up this discussion. Hit the like button if you like the discussion. We'll see you guys next week. Peace.
Peace. Guys, thank you for tuning into the discussion. If you guys want to see more content, we also had the Feel the Love series with Brian Carey as he breaks down the methods of plant growth. Joshua versus the movies, where I go against all your favorite movies, and Joshua versus the music, where I go against all your favorite music videos. So don't forget to check out the content, and I'm going to see you guys in the next discussion.